Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about Ash Fitzsimmons' newest book called Realm and Reign. It is the 15th and final book in her Stranger Magics series, and it ties everything up in a pretty cool bow. If you remember from the last video I did on her 14th book, this one has found our gang of heroes with no magic. Fairy is gone. It collapsed. Francine and Ava managed to convince the current Grand Magnus of the Arcanum to use this super weapon to close off Fairy and Kanata. So for the last 25 years, our group has been living in Alaska, in a compound that they built before magic had completely disappeared, where they thought no one would ever find them, no one's going to come looking, it was deserted enough, out of the way, right? And for the most part, they were correct, except that we're introduced to a new character, Enos Tayward. And Enos is he's the third child of a very wealthy family. They own a vineyard. And his parents were very, very nice people. Donate to charities, raise their kids with, goals. The problem they ran into is that they had a daughter, their middle child, Victoria, who seemed to not conform. She didn't do well in her older brother's shadow, Daniel's shadow. Daniel was being groomed to take over the company. He was being groomed to be, the heir apparent. And so Enos, was like, oh, well, I can do my own thing. I don't have to. So he's really interested in flying. Flying was his thing. His parents promised him that if he completed, I think it was for completing college, they had him get a bachelor's degree. They would give him a plane. And so they did, and he kept his word, they kept their word. And so Daniel, and Daniel's very charismatic, very into taking over the company. And then there was Tori, and Tori was a mess. She wanted to be an actress, wasn't very good at it, didn't make a whole lot of money, got into drugs, and her life kind of spiraled out of control. At 28 years old, Enos inherits the whole company. His parents and his brother were on their way to an event, and the helicopter went down. And Tori was nowhere to be found, and Enos was what was left. So he did what he had to do, flew back over to California, to Sonoma County, and took over the business at his parents' request. And he did most of it from virtual. He really wasn't as hands-on as Daniel would have been. And then they found Tori. When they found Tori, she was strung out, rock bottom. And this was like the second or third time that they'd found her. He'd put her through rehab at one point, and she had promised to get better. And then her boyfriend showed up, and she kind of fell apart. Well, not a boyfriend, actually. I take it back. This one was, the first time around, it was more of she didn't like the fact that he was making her get a job, and it was just too hard, and she disappeared. And then when she was found again, she was in the hospital, and she was very pregnant, and she delivered the baby, and the baby had severe withdrawals from the drugs. And she promised she was going to get better, she was going to do better for the baby. That was her whole goal. She didn't even know who the father was. And unfortunately, an old boyfriend shows up with a bouquet of roses and tells her that in the packet of flower food, it's actually heroin for her. And she decides, one last hit, this is it, I'm done after this for the baby. And she dies of an overdose because the heroin was cut with fentanyl. And so now, not only is Enos stuck with a company that he never intended to run, but now a child that he had never, he eventually had one day thought he wanted to get married and have kids, but 28 years old, and a child that he wasn't sure what to do with. His assistant had offered to find a family for the baby, there'd be a family, and he said no, that this was family, this was Tori's child, and he would raise her, and he ended up adopting her. But the problem that he ran into, one of the weird things, is she had a metal allergy. Titanium was fine, but steel gave her a rash, and it was super weird. Now, before all this had happened, before he had found Victoria had been found again, and the baby came, He had decided that he wanted to open a hunting lodge up in Alaska, and he purchased this property of land, and there was a cabin on it, and he was getting really excited about going to live out there, and he flew out there, and that's when he ran into our compound of heroes. He didn't know anybody was living there. It wasn't on any of the satellite video because obviously Tula had cloaked them. And so when he got there, they met him at the gate, and they were like, "Oh, we're so sorry. Apparently there's a misunderstanding. We thought we had purchased this land. It turned out that it was fraudulent. Is there anything we can do? We really don't want to move. Is there anything we can do to compensate?" And of course he talks to Colleen, and Colleen keeps telling him, we're not crazy, we're not weirdos, we just kind of wanted to start fresh, our lives all kind of fell apart, and so this is what, we're dealing with now. And he was like, "No, you guys can stay." He said, "I don't want to split up the land, it's okay, I wanted to refit the cabin." So happens that there's a Stowe brother who's an architect, and everyone helps him refit the cabin. He's got TV. So when he comes back from burying his sister with a baby, has no idea what to do, shows up at Colin's door, and Colin's like, come on in, I feel you. Come to find out, Colin and Tula had a son, Declan, who is Kenna, which is Enos's daughter, Kenna's age. So 2 infants, and they get him to sit down, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it," and they start, and asking questions, and it finally comes out in conversation that she just has an odd allergy, and they're like, "Oh, what kind of allergy?" And that's, as he explains, they kind of get this look. And that's when they have to reveal who they are. They start by testing her first to see what she, she has the same reaction, and she does. So then they call for Arthur, because Arthur, and I'm just going to call her Arthur because that's what she is, still has her sword. And Excalibur, because I'm not even going to try to pronounce the fairy name for it, has the only remaining magic left is stored in Excalibur. So Tula uses a little bit of the magic to determine whether Kenna is half fae, quarter fae, etc. She's half fae. Her father was full-blooded. So they go ahead, and as they explain us all to Enos, and he's worn out from the flight. He's really kind of thrown off. So he goes to bed, wakes up in the middle of the night with the baby. Cole ends up with his baby. They start talking, things kind of, and drinking, and things kind of, even out. And Enos realizes that this is just a part of his life now. And they show him Cooney, the little pixie, which really kind of helps make things easier for him, because then he's like, "Oh, well, it's a pixie. Like, I can't deny the fact that this, I'm not crazy." So there's actually 5 kids, 6 if you include Ari, because Ari, while she grows up fast, and by the age of 3 she looked like an adult, she still only had the mentality of a child. So Ari became their babysitter, of sorts, and watched over them. There are 5 kids. There's Declan, which is Tula and Collins. There was Cece, who is Ross. No, not Ross. Cece is Kitty and Marcus's. Then her cousin Eddie, who is Edwig's and Beth's. And then you have Gawain, which was Ross and Sam's. I blame Joey for that name. That's totally Joey. Like, okay, Camelot, yeah, that's totally Joey, right? And then you have Kenna, and the kids grow up, and there's only 5 of them. They're the only ones that have children, and they are super close to each other, and so but Cece and Wayne, they call him Gaw. They develop a relationship, and they date in high school, they date in college. All the kids go off to Anchorage for college, and then once school's over, their parents call them back home, back to the compound, where they want them to be safe. And they kind of chafe at this because they're feeling like they're being kept prisoner, they're being locked up in this compound, and this is not where they want it to be. And then it comes out that they're out one day, and a troll shows up. Now, trolls are from the Greylands. They're from Kanata. They're not natural to the mortal realm. And they're all running back to the compound, and they're not going to make it. And it's super scary. And Gawain, who's been sick, mind you, Gawain got sick, feeling sick early that morning, and puking and not feeling very well. Gawain starts to shine, like has this corona. And Val, who is, you know, charging out to protect the kids, all of a sudden has this boost of magic and tears the troll in half. Gwen's power goes out. Val is normal, and he's like, I don't know how it happened. It felt like fairy. I don't know where it came from. But the troll means that there must be a gate to the Darklands, so they go to investigate. Kanata, the gate's there, but they have no way of closing it. There's no way to close. There's nothing they can do, right? Well, early one morning, Cece's out walking around and finds someone. And one important thing to know about Cece, she's a medium. So she, like the Sinali from Kanata, can talk to the dead. So for her whole life, she's seen her older brother, Marcus's son, from his previous life. Let's put it that way, from when he was a Roman. And they're very close. And so they're out walking, and they see something in the woods, and the something comes closer, and her brother Publius is like, I'm gonna go look, you stay here. And he goes and investigates, and he's talking to the person, which means that either it's another medium or a Sinali. And it's a Sinali, and they come over, and Rorit is the name, I think, how to pronounce it, I'm not quite 100% sure, reveals that he's Eric and Hope's son, Kanata's grandson, and that Kanata had asked him to come, had opened a gate when he felt it was safe enough, and asked him to come investigate and see what had happened. And when they opened the gate, he said that Kanata said he could sense fairy, that fairy still exists. And everyone's like, well, no, it doesn't. There's no way it exists. So they go back to the gate, where Kanata appears, and he's like, no, I feel it. It's right there. And he points at Gaw. And he goes, Ross knows. All you have to do is destroy the shell. And this freaks everybody out. Ross is like, I suspected when I got pregnant, I suspected when he was born, but how do you kill your own child? He's my baby. Nobody's gonna touch him. They all go back to the compound, and the kids all have their own place. It's like a bachelor pad where they all stay together with Ari, and they all take one look at each other and they say, we're not staying. We can't trust them. Did you see the look on, Val's face when he thought that fairy's gonna come back? They're gonna kill Gaul. We need to leave. So what do they decide to do? They take that RV, that old RV that Hope and all of them had ran cross country with. They take the RV. They sneak out of the house, climb over the wall, go to the barn, take all the gas from all of the other vehicles, fill it into the RV, and go. Where are they going to go? Well, Rorit has an uncle in Kentucky, Fidwick, and they're going to go to him. So they take off. They use maps. They shut off all their phones. They drive for like 4 days straight to get there, right? They get there. Well, even before they get there, apparently Cece's brother had gone ahead to check. Cece's grandmother came by and said that the parents were already there. And she was like, she's super confused. What do you mean there? Well, they knew where you were going to go. Hope and Eric showed up looking for their son and figured that he would direct them to your uncle. And the directions they were getting, they're actually getting from Orson, because Orson had been there before, so Cece was telling them where to go for the last, leg of the journey. So they get there, and they all step off the bus with guns. They're going to shoot anybody who tries to take him from them, kind of deal, and the guy who runs the compound, the human, Colin calls him Drago, because they had encounters before early in the series. Assures them of safety, invites them to stay in his home while they recover. Gaul is sick again because he's so close to a Greylands gate. And so then, of course, the parents show up, and Ross and Sam immediately are like, we would never let anybody hurt you. I don't know why you would ever think that, kind of thing going on. And Cece has a problem with eavesdropping. Like, this girl listens in on everything. She manages to listen in on deck talking to his dad, and Colin tells him tells him that there is nothing. He would never in a million years do anything to hurt Gaul, and that he couldn't believe that his own kid thought that. And he asked me, said, have I ever done anything to make you think that I would hurt one of you? And he was like, no, but it was just, we were reacting, and everybody's faces, and so they make up. And everybody's starting to feel better, but Gaul is sick. and him and Cece are sitting together, and he tells her, he says, he says, what if those people are still alive? And he was like, and Kanata's going to keep punching open gates between here and the Greylands until I reopen Fairy because of the balance. And she keeps trying to talk him out of it, but he says, I don't want to live like this. And so he kisses her, and he steps out into like the street, the field, and explosion. He's gone. There's a gate to Fairy. And everybody is shocked. Cece is horrified. Her boyfriend just committed suicide in front of her, like totally freaked out. So they all head into Fairy. And the Greylanders that were in this compound have started packing up because they're going to go back to Kanata because Eric is offering them safety shelter because he's, not a vile ruler like Nath or, crazy like the other brother was, right? They get into Fairy and everything's fine. If you remember, in the last book, Fairy was falling apart. It was collapsing in on itself, and apparently it was collapsing in on Ross, which is what was happening. Fairy was fine. So they ended up going to the French settlement to make sure everybody was okay, and everyone was like, we don't know what happened. Like, everything was collapsing one minute, and the next minute, it was all back the way it was before. It's so weird. No time has passed. Everybody in Fairy had been kept in like this little limbo inside of Gaul, and now they were all fine. And it was so odd. Like the villa was there, Colin's mansion, Irene's pink monstrosity. It was all there. So, but Gaul was gone. Cece didn't see him dead. Her brother said he couldn't sense him. Her grandmother couldn't sense him. He was gone. There was nothing. And she started to mourn that and felt really upset. Arthur came to her and sat down with her and told her, she said, you never get over it. She was like, I've been where you are. I understand. You never get over it. It eases with time, but it never goes away. And then she starts hearing Ross calling her in her sleep. And it's so odd that she finally goes over to Ross's one day and she asks her, she says, I gotta talk to you. And she goes, are you calling me unconsciously, like in your sleep? Something, I 3 nights in a row I've heard you. And Ross was like, no, but I have an idea. She was like, when I was Fairy, we were 5 consciousnesses together. She was like, maybe my part of Fairy is trying to call you because of your connection to Gaul. Do you mind if I hypnotize you? No, go ahead. Hypnotizes her. She starts searching. She finds the 5 consciousnesses of Fairy. They're all separated, and they're all, we can't get to him. So you're Cece. He's been repeating your name over and over. We don't know how to get to him. We don't know what to do to make him wake up. And so the Ross version takes her to him, and he's just standing there, and he's raw power. Like, he's not really a person. He's just raw power, saying Cece's name over and over and over again. And she tries to talk to him, and nothing works. And so that Ross says, well, if he's my son, maybe we can send you back, bring me in, and I'll see if maybe I can get through to him. And Cece doesn't hesitate. No, that's not going to work. And runs at him, wraps her arms around him, and kisses him. And almost dies because she just came in contact with pure magic from Fairy. Like, burns up her body. But Gaul wakes up. It works. So he keeps her in a stasis for 2 weeks, and probably about midway through, about week 1, he wakes her sort of up into a fake Alaska kind of mind frame so that she can, start to move around, do better, feel better while still asleep, because she'll be in excruciating pain if she woke up. The problem is he can't manifest. He can't talk to the 3. He's struggling. And so eventually they decide that they have to wake her up, even though it's going to cause her pain, because she needs to be his mouthpiece. So they do. Immediately as soon as she wakes up, Val puts a numbing enchantment on her. Dr. B gets her medication. And then she's able to talk to the 3, because she can still see Gaul, and tell the 2 kings what he wants. And then it's revealed that there is a 3rd, and it's not Irene. Irene died when they got to the mortal realm. One of her guards killed her and then killed himself. And her oldest son didn't even know he was king. And his oldest remaining child is Kenna. He was the man who impregnated Tori. So Kenna, because her father died when she was 2, is queen. And so he gives the boost to the 3, and Kenna has to deal with a lot. What no one realizes at first is that when Cece hugged Gaul, she got and he fixed her, she got a boost. She actually was stronger than the 3. She's one of the strongest. So Val starts working with Kenna, Colin starts working with Cece, and then Colin has to help Val work with Kenna because Kenna has to call her court. And so she does. She calls her court. They destroy Irene's ugly castle, get Robbie Stowe to build them a much better one, and call her court. Her court doesn't like her. She's a half-blood. She's not strong enough. She's got ties to the 2 kings, so she's too close to them. Of course, they want to go back to the Fringe and start terrorizing the Fringe, and Cece has to go make a show of power, which makes them leave and protects the Fringe, but it's politics, and people aren't good with politics. At the same time, the Arcanum has to figure out if they're going to be an Arcanum again. And one of the problems they're running into is that there is no one to lead. Tula doesn't want to be Grand Magnus. She got kicked out. Maria can't cast. She can only enchant now, so she's no good. They don't want to put anybody on the old council because of their sentiments that they had towards Tula. And so their best option is Ed until his daughter Eddie is ready. And Eddie, when they wand test her, tests super strong on a point, like to the point where she could actually cast Battle Wand already. Declan also tests, and he has an Ash Wand, so he's pretty strong too. And so Ed was like, well, I can't. The Minor Arcanum, that was the agreement. I couldn't take over. So he asks Cece to go with him to Arizona to see if he could talk to Carrie Jones and see if maybe there's something they could work out. Well, Dr. Jones has passed away. Her niece lives in the house now and slams the door in their face when she finds out that Simon Magnus is at her door. But Dr. Jones appears to Cece, and her and Ed have a little talk. She disappears. She comes back and says, they have agreed to your terms. And he was like, so how long do I have to prepare my daughter? And she goes, indefinitely. They've decided that you've grown up. You're not Simon Magnus. You're someone completely different, and they're okay with this. So first order of business is to set up a place. They make a pocket dimension, put the castle from Arc 2 in there, and anchor it to their land in Alaska, which Enos has said that he'll leave the land to Kenna, like that won't ever be a problem, and he's going to stay in Ferry. He's basically turned the company over, so he's not running anymore, and he stays in Ferry with Kenna. This does lead to problems. He gets kidnapped at one point because her subjects decide that they don't want her, and they're going to control her by controlling her father. And Cece and the group goes to save her, and Cece gets mad because of the Fae temper and fireballs everybody. Ari is able to save Enos and pull him out, and Kenna of course comes through and does her own blasting, but Cece killed quite a few people. And so when she wakes up and realizes what she did, Ed shows up, because who's got a more bloody history than Simon Magnus? And he sits with her and he goes, do you even know how many you killed? And she's like, no. And he goes, 7. Gal was keeping track, and she starts throwing up. She's absolutely horrified. And he said, you have to decide. He said, you can be a tyrant. You're powerful enough to be a tyrant, but you have to decide what you want to do with this power, and you have to learn to control it. So it's kind of one of those things where then, when she goes down to finally see everybody, because she got a good knock on the head, and she was concussed, and they made her rest. She's worried that everyone's going to hate her, that they're going to think that she's a monster. And of course, the first person is Enos, and he has no qualms about it. Thanks her for saving his life, and Kenna thanks her for saving him, and then of course it comes out that Maria has killed people, and Marcus has killed people, and then Val sits down and says, I've killed more than all of you combined in my 2,200 years of life. And so then it's just kind of one of those, and it's what you do with it. He said, as long as you have to be remorseful. Well, then Val sits down with her and says, the anger is always going to be there, but we can teach you how to control it and how you can recognize it. And this comes after they go after Ava and Francine. They discover that they're not actually dead, although Dahlia, Francine's daughter, believed that she was. And so they went after her. Went after the daughter. The daughter said, "Oh well, I thought they were dead. I found the mother told me not to go to this place, so I went to this place and I found a burned out car with 2 bodies and Magnus chains on it, and I assumed it was them." But Ed was like, "No, there's no way. They're hiding." And come to find out that they were. They had they were blocking blood traces, blocking sleepwalking traces. Ed did eventually find them in Florida, and the group decides we're going to go together to Florida to get them. We'll be teenagers. No one will suspect us. It'll be super easy. And they'll get a day to, enjoy the sun. So they get out there. They go from shop to shop to shop. And there's, a big storm's coming in. They're not sure where to go next. There's this earthly treasures shop, but they're not sure that witches would be, doing something so kitschy. But a dead girl tells Cece, the only British person I know of owns that earthly treasure shop over there. So that's where they head. And sure enough, that's where they find them. And things are going pretty good until, Kenna goes into the back and Francine follows her and doesn't come back out when Kenna does. And that's when Ava kind of starts, confronting them. And they tell her who they are. And, Eddie's like, oh, my mom's Beth. And she goes, well, you can't be much of a witch because Beth never was. She goes, oh, but you didn't take my father into account, Simon Magnus. And then, of course, Cece steps up and she goes, oh, and Kitty's my mom. And she goes, well, you're probably a dirty blood, gets really nasty, really makes Cece mad, and to the point where Cece slams her against the wall, is going to kill her right then and there, and her brother steps in. And he actually steps directly into her beam of magic and grabs her hands and is like, Cece, stop. And his hands become visible, and she gets completely confused and let's go over magic, and he disappears, and everybody was like, was that your brother? And she goes, yeah, how did that happen? I don't know what happened, because she's never been able to make people come alive the way that Hope does. So they get Ava and Francine back to the Arcanum, and they hold a trial, and they found Leander, and Leander, of course, gave up the ghost. His 2 girls were witches or wizards, so they needed to be trained, and he wanted to protect his family, and so Tula ran the offense and threw this is what they said. They wanted to get rid of magic. There was no mistake about it. And at the end, Ed stood up and offered them to say something, and they had nothing to say for themselves. They refused to speak, and he said, well, I'm trying to prevent killing, but I think in this case I'll make an exception, and 2 bolts to the head, and they were done. Thank goodness. These 2 women have been the bane of this story for books. It is awful. Like, they're terrible people. Gone. Val sits down with Cece after this and tells her that they can work to help her control her anger, identify when she's going to be angry, that kind of thing. And so he does. He works with her. And it helps. It helps her get it under control, because she was worried that this was what she was going to be her whole life. And God keeps telling her she needs to go out, she needs to go see the world and not stay in Fairy just because of him. And her parents tell her the same thing. And so eventually the away team gets put back together, because where are the misfits? Where are they going to go? Like, she wants to see the world, and Marcus and Kitty still want to work, and so they put the away team back together, put Frank in charge, because now Ted lives in the fringe settlement. He's too old to be able to run it. Put Frank in charge, which, great. But speaking of Frank, Frank, as we found out, is half Fae, which makes Ari a quarter of Fae. Which explains Frank's kind of difference from the other dragons and wanting to sit with his daughter and wanting to raise her. And so his father, Owen, goes to Georgie one night and explains to her why Frank feels the way he does. He says Frank's mine. And he was like, and so he has human tendencies that dragons are not going to understand. And when you told him to kill his child, you basically broke his heart. And Georgie was like, but that's just the way that dragons are. And he was like, but he's not a dragon. He was like, what would have happened to Joey if Helen were gone? And she goes, well, that did happen. Okay, then you already know how devastated Joey was, and you told him to kill Ross. And a bulb clicked on it. And Georgie was like, I was an awful mother. She goes, and she said, I told him to leave to protect him and the hatchling, because I knew that the others would try to kill her, and I didn't want that. I was a little harsh in what I said. And goes, that needs to come between you and Frank. Well, then Ari decides she's going to speak to Georgie herself, gathers her friends as backup, marches over there and confronts Georgie, basically demands, why did I deserve to die? And Georgie kind of, apologizes, tries to explain, tells her that that's the way that dragons think, that it had nothing to do with Ari personally, and Ari just wants to know what was so wrong with me that nobody wanted me. And her and of course, as they're talking, Frank shows up because he's afraid that someone's going to hurt Ari, and Georgie says no one's going to hurt her, no one's going to touch her, she's family, it's fine. And things between his mom and him stay kind of strained, but Ari manages to forgive her. And even at one point, she gets Joey to put the saddle on her and take Ari up flying because Ari can't fly, she doesn't have wings. And I thought that was the sweetest thing. Like, Georgie didn't understand, but she learned. She realized her mistakes and she tried to make up for them. As for the away team, the younger kids got put on the away team. Declan is sent to Arcanum as an ambassador. Raruit's sent to the Arcanum as an ambassador from the Greylands. And so the team kind of get to explore, they get to see places. Gal goes ahead and develops an area where no one else can find that looks like Alaska for them, builds a house there for them so they have their own bachelor pad again, gives them a beach that they can hang out at, and him and Cece spend a lot of time there. She spends a lot of time going between places, and they're sitting on the boulder one night, and he's got the aurora lights going, and she goes, I remember when I told you that this would be the perfect place to propose, which happened at the beginning of the book. And he goes, oh, I do too, and proposes. And the ring is beautiful. It's got the aurora lights on it. It's perfect. And it's kind of, everybody's working together. Everyone's talking together. The company is talking to the Arcanum is talking to the minor Arcanum, the fairies are talking to everybody. Everything is settled. And this is where the book comes to a close, where things kind of tie up. And I felt like it was a good ending. Everything ended up where it was supposed to be. Everybody ended up where they were supposed to be. We got families and everyone's working together, which has never happened before. Even the Greylands is working with everybody because of Hope and Eric, and everything fell into place. And I couldn't have asked for a better ending. I'm sad to see it go. I can't wait to reread the whole series because it's that good, but I felt like Ash did a really good job with this, and it made me really happy to see. So I really hope you check out the series Stranger Magics, this book 1, and let me know what you think in the comments.